Hi everyone, how are you all? I'm sure you all are good at your places. So since you all know that we were doing chapter number 3, social institution, continuity and change. And today we're going to continue that particular chapter. Okay? So I'm beginning to share my PPT with all of you. Okay? So uh, so this is the PPT that's there right on your screens. I'm sure it is visible to everyone. I'm sure it is visible on everyone's screen. So we were doing chapter number 3, social institution. I told you yesterday that what is social institution? Something that is established organization, something that has certain rules, regulations, rituals, customs, and people do follow those things, right? That's how we call that particular thing as established institution, and that is what your social institution is all about. And they are of many types, and in this chapter we're going to study the 3 types of social institutions: institution of caste, then institution of tribes, and eventually institution of family and kinship. And in the last class we did the institution of caste, in which we studied about how it used to be in the past, how it used to be in the colonial period, means when Britishers were ruling us, and we also studied how it used to be in the past. But we didn't complete, the caste, the scenario of the caste in the present. So I'm sure my screen is visible on your screen as well. We studied about this particular slide. We also understood the difference between Varna and Jati, the 2 terms that we used to use for this term caste. And we also studied rules and regulations or features of caste. It was important to study that because this is the only way we studied the caste in the past, right? How the rules and regulations used to be imposed on the people. We studied those 6 points regarding the rules and regulation, all right, and features. You can also call them features or characteristics. Then we study the concept of purity and pollution, right? That was very much central to the institution of caste only, remember that. And after that, we also studied the scenario or the condition of caste in the colonial period, right? How Britishers brought a lot of changes in the institution of caste, how the census of 1901 conducted by the Britishers, and how Land Revenue Settlement Act came, and how it gave legal recognition to the upper caste people to own the land. And we also studied Government of India Act of 1935 that gave legal recognition to scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. And I also told you yesterday that if a question like that come in your exam, that which act of India gave legal recognition to scheduled tribes or scheduled caste, how it came into being, then you have to say that it came with the Government of India Act of 1935. All right. So we have studied a lot, about the changes that actually came in the period of colonialism. And then we also studied a little bit about the caste in the present. I told you the 2 concepts of Srinivas, Sanskritization, that we're going to study eventually in upcoming chapters. But it was important to discuss the concept of dominant caste with you. I discussed that concept with you. I told you that what are those dominant castes, what are their characteristics, all these things that are there right on your screens. All right. And I also gave you certain examples that which castes are popular in certain states. I told you about that as well. Okay. And you just got to remember here that M.N. Srinivas gave the concept of dominant caste, and obviously concept of Sanskritization also. But we are not going to do the concept of Sanskritization in this particular chapter. We're going to study the Sanskritization concept in the following chapters. All right. And today we're going to start with this concept of institution of caste in visible and non-visible way. Look, we have studied the institution of caste in the past. We have studied the institution of caste in your past period, during the period of colonialism, and we have now come at the stage we are going to study about the caste in the present scenario. So I discussed the dominant caste concept of dominant caste with all of you, and today I'm going to discuss the institution of caste is both visible and non-visible. Look, it's a very critical, very extremely, understandable concept, and I want all of you to, really focus on this particular concept in order to understand this. It's not so easy to understand this, but I have prepared your PPT in such a way that you're definitely going to understand, this concept in an extremely easy way. And I'm here to, clear all those things. So when we talk about the institution of caste, that it is both visible and non-visible, then you've got to remember that the institution of caste is visible for a certain society, but at the same time, it is invisible for the other section of society. And now we're going to understand that it is visible for what kind of society, or for what group, and it is invisible for which section of the society. We're going to understand this. So particularly the upper caste elite were able to benefit from subsidized public education, especially professional education in science, technology, medicine, and management. At the same time, they were also able to take advantage of the expansion of the state sector jobs in the early decades after independence. In this initial period, their lead over the rest of the society ensured that they didn't face any serious competition, as their privileged status got consolidated in the second and third generations. These groups began to believe that it was kind of their advantage. And now the situation is totally opposite to it. Now the institution of caste, which was very much helpful or beneficial for the upper caste, now it is no longer a beneficial aspect for their caste. And look what happened. Right after the independence, certain sections of the society, and what are those certain sections of the society? Those certain sections of the society are generally upper caste people. So they got a lot of advantage in that particular era because they already had inherited education. Look, when I say inherited education, means they had all the access to education, and they had better life chance, or they had better opportunities. Just remember that when a person has better opportunity, when a person has better life chances, when a person has better accesses to the different, resources, he's always going to develop more than the other section of the society. And this was what actually happening during the Britisher era or post-Britisher era. People, those who have better advantages, those who had better opportunities, they got a lot of education, and due to that education, they got jobs as well, right? So it was pretty easy, as compared to the other section of the society. It was pretty easy for the upper caste people to get the, public sector jobs or private, or I would say government jobs, right? I'm sure you are understanding. But there was other section of the society like lower caste people who didn't have, so much access, for the education. So they actually, they remained back in that particular race for the upliftment or for the development. So this is what actually happened. And look, the institution of the caste is visible only for that particular person who has got the advantage, but it is visible or invisible for that particular section who doesn't have any advantage, right? You got to remember this. So visible for the section who's getting advantage, and invisible for the section that is not getting advantage. And remember that for the so-called scheduled caste and scheduled tribes and the backward class, the opposite had happened. For them, caste has become all too visible. Indeed, their caste had tended to eclipse the other dimensions of their identities because they have no inherited educational and social capital, and because they must compete with already entrenched upper caste group. They cannot afford to abandon their caste to identify for it is one of the few collective assets they have. Moreover, they continue to suffer from discrimination of various kinds. The policies of reservation and other forms of protective discrimination instituted by the caste is response to the political pressure serve as their lifelines. But using this lifeline tends to make their caste the all-important and often the most important aspect of their identity that the world recognizes. So remember that this certain section of the society that got advantage due to the caste, now they're not getting that advantage, because at a particular period of time, you can assume the time after independence, people had all the access to education, so they were getting they were getting a lot of advantage because of their education, but there was a certain section of the society that didn't have that much access. So they eventually remained, you know, somewhere on the back seat. And that's what I wanted to tell you. And look, this is the easiest way, this slide that I'm showing you, this is the easiest ways to understand this particular concept. Look what happened. Caste system in the contemporary period has tended to become invisible for the upper and middle class, but it is opposite in the lower caste. Or discuss some of the rules that the caste system imposes. This is the other answer, you know, that you can study afterwards also. So I've already told you that upper caste and upper middle class benefited significantly from the development policies of the post-colonial era. And upper caste elite are able to benefit from the subsidized public education. When I say subsidized public education, then it means that a very cheap education, you know, education that for that you don't have to pay a lot. You know, we have public education that is subsidized, means very cheap. So all the people had a lot of access to the education, especially who were not discriminated. Certain sections of the societies were discriminated, and because of that they didn't get that particular type of education, and they didn't able to enhance or increase the life chances or the opportunities that they had. But on the other hand, a particular section of the society, especially upper caste society, they had a lot of access, and they were able to uplift themselves and got a lot of better life chances, and I got a lot of opportunities. Life chances means kind of opportunities that really help you to enhance and, you know, uplift yourself. And on the other hand, for SC, ST and OBCs, caste has become all too visible. They have no inherited educational and social capital. So upper caste had social inherited education. On the other hand, lower caste didn't have your inherited education. They didn't have any kind of education from the foundation, I would say. So from the very beginning, a certain section of society had a lot of privileges. On the other hand, certain society had no privileges. I'm facing a lot of network problem today. I'm feeling this actually during this class, but we'll still continue. No problem. Okay. So this is another simple form that can really help you to understand, you know, this particular concept. So upper caste is invisible. Look, they had resources available in the form of technological resources, educational resources, and they were qualified as well, and took the advantage of the expansion of the state sector jobs in the early decades after independence, right? The economic and educational capital alone is quite sufficient to ensure that they will continue to get the best in terms of life chances. For this group, it now seems that caste plays no part in their public lives apart from personal sphere, right? And for the other section of the society, caste is, you know, it straight away becomes visible. They had no inherited education and social institutions. For education, there is reservation and leads to upliftment of the caste. Now, why there is, reservation in the government jobs? So this particular aspect or this particular paragraph that I'm trying to, you know, make you understand can really justify that why people have got the reservation, because they were at a particular time they were deprived of or they were devoid of certain privileges. So that's the reason to, you know, uplift them, or to, you know, bring them the social or the social same level. The government is trying to, you know, go for the reservation, all those things. The lower caste take advantage of reservation using caste to push themselves forward. The policies of reservation and other forms of protective discrimination instituted by the caste in response to political pressure serve as their lifelines. So I'm sure you've got a little bit of idea that for what section of the society it is invisible, this institution of caste is invisible, and for what kind of society or what kind of section of the society this particular institution of caste is invisible. So these are few slides. You can refer to this slide, you can refer to this previous slide as well, that is in the form of question. You can also refer this particular slide, and obviously the first slide is definitely going to help you to understand this particular concept, right? So they are actually 4 in number, that, and these four in number is definitely going to help you a lot in understanding this particular concept. So now we're going to understand the next institution, the second institution after the institution of caste. Now we're going to understand the institution of tribal community. And we have completed the first institution of caste. We understood how it used to be in the past, how it used to be during colonial era, and how it used to be in the present. You know, the concept of visible and invisible is something that is related to the present scenario of the institution of caste. Now we're going to understand the second institution, and I told you very in very beginning of this session that we're going to study the three institutions: the institution of caste, the institution of tribal, and institution of family and kinship. Now we have reached the second institution, that is in the form of tribal community. So now we're going to understand about this particular community, that is our second institution. All right, so the total population of tribe in India is 8.2%, right? So out of 100%, tribal communities occupies 8.2%. They are in 8.2% ratio as compared to 100% of the population of India. Okay, and they're also called as Janjatis or Adivasis. I'm sure you are aware of this term, and we often used to witness these terms, or often face these terms or see these terms in newspapers and in news headlines as well. So these are the terms that are used for this particular community, and it was introduced in the colonial era. I told you that from the Government of India Act 1935, the two terms were introduced: scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. And scheduled tribes is obviously introduced in the colonial era, and that's what actually written here. The term was introduced in the colonial era. And look, there are three definitions regarding the tribal community is concerned. So we can have an understanding through these three definitions. First, a social group consisting of collection of families and lineages based on shared ties of kinship, ethnicity, and common history of territorial political organization. This is the first meaning of this particular term. And second is believed, it is believed to be a people of the forest whose distinctive habitat in the hills and forest areas shaped by their economic and social and political attributes. So we are very much aware of the ecological habitat that this particular community has. They always live in the forest, and I would say in dense forests and the hilly areas. That is the characteristic of the region in which they live. And this is another kind of thing that you have to understand here. The tribes were the communities that didn't practice a religion with a written text. So they had a religion, but they didn't have your internet connection is unstable. Okay, no problem. So they have the religion, but they didn't have written religion, right? The kind of religion that we people or the normal people have, they didn't have that kind of religion, and they have a state of political form. So they can be some kind of head person in this tribal community, and they had the caste system, but not as diversified as ours are. And after that, they were neither Hindus nor peasants, so they were not considered either Hindus or peasants. They are not categorized, or they are not put into this particular category. Okay, so classification of tribal communities, it is very important for all of you to understand this, right? So we classify tribal societies through two aspects. One is through permanent traits, and second through acquired trait. Look, what is trait? Trait means quality. Trait means characteristic. Trait means feature. So permanent features are there. Acquired features are also there. Permanent features are that kind of features that are already with them from very, very long time. But acquired traits are those traits that they are now following. Nowadays there has been a little bit change in their lives as well. So acquired trait is that trait that they have acquired nowadays, and it is also known as original traits. You got to remember that we use original traits or acquired traits at the same point. All right, now we're going to understand how we understand this particular group in terms of permanent traits. So when we understand permanent traits of the tribal communities or tribal societies, then we understand religion, we understand region, then we understand language, then we understand their race. When I say race means physical characteristics. All right, race is something that is related to physical characteristics, something that is related to racial terms. Race is also known as racial terms. Race is also known as physical characteristics. Okay, and when we talk about the acquired traits, then I've already told you that acquired trait means original traits. Then we classify them with the mode of livelihood, that what they are doing to sustain themselves. When I say livelihood, what they are doing to sustain themselves, that's what it actually means. So what practices they are doing, what kind of occupation they are in, this is what livelihood is all about. And then the another aspect that you got to understand, that extent of incorporation into Hindu society. Look, extent means to what extent, to what area, to what domain, to what space they are incorporated into Hindu society. Because there are some tribal societies that have completely assimilated into Hindu society, that have completed, absorbed into Hindu society. But there are certain tribal societies that are living totally isolated from our society. Okay, so they have attitude towards Hindu society. So we're going to understand this extent of incorporation into Hindu society with two aspects, either through assimilation into Hindu society, and the other through attitude towards Hindu society, right? So this is what, when we talk about the language of this particular tribe, that comes under permanent trait. Remember that it is written here that under permanent trait we understand about language of this particular tribe. Okay, so language, there are 4 types of language that this particular community or this particular institution or group of people speak. Now what they speak Aryans. Aryans is that kind of language that is very much related to northern Indians, right? And these are the language that they speak in this particular category. Then we try to understand the Dravidians. Now under Dravidians, they speak Telugu, they speak Kannada, they speak Malayalam, they speak Tamil, they speak many southern language. So Dravidians, or the category of Dravidian languages, are those languages that they speak, and that is very much related to the languages of the southern region. Then they speak Austric as well. Now Austric or Austric language is that language that is mostly speak in the northern Himalayas, that is mostly speak in the Jammu and Kashmir, that is spoken by people in Himachal Pradesh, that is spoken mostly in the northern belt. Okay, and the 4th type of language that this particular community speak is your Tibeto-Burman language. Now, Tibeto-Burman language is that language that is mostly speak in the northeastern region, the region that is very much close to your Myanmar region, that is very much close to Bangladesh. So they speak this particular language in the 4th category, Tibeto-Burman language, because Tibet is also situated there, very much close to the northern eastern states. All right, so these were the 4 languages that you got to remember, that you got to understand, when we talk about the language in terms of permanent traits of this particular community. Okay, so now we're going to understand race. I've already told you that when I say race, it also means racial terms. And when I say racial terms, it means that something that is based on a physical characteristics, that how person looks. Is that particular person is fair, or is that particular person is dark, whether that particular person is tall, or whether that particular person is somewhere on the shorter side. We got to understand all these things. So this is what race is all about. And remember that the moment race comes in your mind, you got to say that race, it is physical characteristics, nothing more than that. Okay, so when we talk about the Aryans, we already I've discussed about this term Aryan, that is somewhere related to the northern region of India. So they have, they are fair in their complexion, right? When we talk about the Dravidians that are there in the southern region, they are dark in their complexion. And when we talk about the Negroid is something that is not only dark, but the people that are very dark. And people, which are those regions that have the people who are very dark? Tamil Nadu is there, Sri Lankan people are there that are very dark. So, okay, so Negroid is that particular section of this tribal community that are very dark in their complexion. And the 4th category is Mongolian. Mongolian is that particular region which we almost or already talked about, the northern eastern states. The Mongolian region is that region that I've talked about, the northern eastern state. And they have orientalizes, means they have a very kind of I would say small isis. that is very much different from the normal population. So this is how we identify tribal communities. We can identify tribal communities through their language, we identify tribal communities through their race. Okay, so I'm sure you've understood these two aspects. I've tried my level best to elaborate it as much as I can in this particular session. So tribes have been classified according to their permanent and according to their acquired traits. Acquired traits, I've already told you that acquired traits are original traits. Okay, so when we talk about the language, I've already told you that Indo-Aryan language, Dravidian language, Austric language, and Tibeto-Burman language. So these are the four categories of language that this particular tribe speak. And when we talk about the region, then I'm sure you're well aware of this particular thing, that ecological habitat cover includes hills, forests, rural plains, and urban industrial areas as well. So we gonna find these tribal societies in these kind of regions. And when I say racial classification, then Negroid, Australoid, Mongoloid, and Dravidian and Aryan. So these are the 5 racial classification of the tribal communities. And when we talk about their size, I think it's important to add the size as well, because through this particular aspect, we also come to know about the different names of the tribal communities. Now, the tribal communities that are large in number are Gonds, Bills, Santals, Orans, Bodos, Mundas. These all are those tribes that are larger in number, and the other tribe that are smaller in number are Andamanese Islanders. So the tribal communities that live on the Andaman and Nicobar Union Territory, or in those particular regions, they are lesser in number as compared to the tribals that live in the inner areas of our nation. Okay, so this is what permanent tribes were all about. And now we're going to talk about the acquired traits. Acquired traits means original traits that they are nowadays doing, or the practices that they are putting into implementation into their lives. This is what I'm talking about. So their basis of livelihood is somewhere related to doing fishing. So they are fishermen, right? They are food gatherers and they are hunters. They always gather food from the dense forest. They are always involved in hunting. They are involved in doing fishing. So this is their basis of livelihood. And the second and third concept in acquired traits that I've already discussed with you, in the form of assimilation into Hindu society, and the second one is attitude towards Hindu society. Assimilation means to observe into the system, to come into the system. There are certain sections of the tribal societies that have assimilated into the Hindu society, that have come into the Hindu society. So these sections of the societies are considered as societies that are assimilated into Hindu society. And the societies that have tried to keep them isolated from the Hindu society are those tribes that we consider under the category of this particular that is written right here on your screen, attitude towards Hindu society. Okay, so I'm sure now you have understood this particular uh, institution of caste. There are a lot of more things to discuss about this particular community. Okay, now I'm sure you've understood their percentage in India, that is 8.2%. I'm sure you are aware of the terms that we use for them, right, to describe them, or to to call them with their names. And I'm sure now you have understood that this particular aspect was introduced in the colonial era. I'm sure you have got the idea about classification of tribal societies in the form of permanent traits and acquired traits. Under permanent traits, we talk about the region, language, race, and under acquired traits, we talk about the mode of livelihood, extension of the incorporation, that is in the form of assimilation, or the attitude that they have regarding this particular society. I'm talking about the Hindu society, right? So you got to understand the classification of language. You got to remember this race discrimination, or I would say race differentiation based on the physical characteristics. And these are 3-4 slides that have been made in a very, very easy way, right? And I have explained these concepts with you. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the opinions, it's important to understand the opinions that people have regarding tribal community. Okay, I've got the indication that this class is going to end within 8 or 9 minutes, so we'll discuss about this concept also meanwhile. Okay, so opinions for tribal communities, right? Look, there were two opinions. There were two opinions right after independence about these two tribal communities. One group of opinion was called as isolationist group, and the other group that wanted to include these tribal communities into themselves was regarded as integrationist group. So you got to remember the two terms, integrationist group and isolationist group. Now what would they say? They would say that two opinions. During the 1960s, scholars debated whether tribes should be seen as one end of continuum with caste-based Hindu society, peasant society, or whether they were altogether different from this kind of community. So there was a debate that was going on in 1960s that should we include it into our community or should we not include them into our community. So these were the two debates that were going on. So the group of people that were in the thinking of putting themselves into the society or putting themselves into their system was the group of integrationists, and the group that didn't want to put them into their society and want to leave them in isolation was the group of isolationists. Okay, so those who argued for the continuum saw tribes as not being fundamentally different from the caste peasant society, but merely less stratified and with a more community, rather the individual notion of resource ownership. So what they were saying that wanted to include this community into their system, they were saying that they are not much different from us. The only difference is that our community has more stratified division of caste, but they didn't have that stratified division of the caste. So they were giving their arguments, they were giving their reasons to include them. And moreover, they were saying that tribals were merely backward Hindus and their problems had to be addressed within the same framework as the other of backward classes. So they were saying that tribals were not much different from us. They were just backward Hindus that were not included in the civilization process, or that were not included in the developmental process. And the other section of the society, I'm talking about the isolationists. So what they were saying that tribals were wholly different from the caste because they had no notion of purity and pollution. I told you when I was teaching you the concept of institution of caste, I told you that concept of pollution and purity was somewhere that was very much related to our caste system. But the arguments that isolationists were putting, they were saying that this group has no concept of pollution and purity. So it means that they are different from us. So they were giving this kind of arguments in order to keep them in isolation. So they were isolationists. Right? They were also arguing that the tribal communities, they need special protection, from rest of the society, and nobody should go on and interfere and indulge in their activities. So they were giving that kind of arguments. Okay, so there were two opinions in the form of two sections of the society that were giving two different opinions regarding this particular community. Okay, so this is what now you got to understand here, that do you think tribes are primitive communities living isolated, untouched by civilization? And the other part that you got to understand is right there in the question number 6 of your textbook. Open up, question number 6 of your textbook, and you will definitely understand what this question wants to say. So look, we want to include the tribal communities within our system, and the reasons that we have to give regarding this particular concept are as follows. Now, some scholars argue that there is no coherent basis for treating tribes as pristine, that is original or pure societies, uncontaminated by civilization. So what scholars were saying, look, when I say scholars are the researchers, that do a lot of research on different sections of the societies. The the scholars, other researchers. So what they were saying that there is no coherent basis for treating tribes as pristine. Coherent means clear. So they said that there was no clear basis that tribes are very much, different from us. It was just a matter of civilization. They were not enough civilized, but they were somewhere like us. So they gave this particular reason to convince the authorities, or convince the mass, or convince the the most powerful section of the society. So the second argument that they proposed that tribes should really be seen as secondary phenomena arising out of the exploitative and colonialistic context. So what they were saying, when I say proposed, then it means that they were of the view. So they had the view that tribes actually came out of the exploitative nature that Britishers put on us. So they came out of that exploitative nature. So that's why they are considered as secondary phenomena. Okay. So there is another point that you got to understand here in order to understand that they were not much different from us. So what used to happen in the past, many of the so-called Rajput kingdoms of central and western India actually emerged through a process of stratification among Adivasis communities themselves. So what was happening in the central India and the western India? When I say central India, then I'm talking about the states of Madhya Pradesh, I'm talking about the states of Chhattisgarh, I'm talking about the states of UP as well. And when I talk about the western India, then I'm talking about the Rajasthan, I'm talking about the Gujarat. So many of the Rajput kingdoms in these central and western India actually emerged out of the stratification that these tribal communities had. So they are emerged out of their stratification. So from this point, we can actually say that they were not actually much different from us. So this is the point that they put forward in order to make us understand about this particular concept, that they were very much like us. All right. So the next point, they often exercise dominance over the plains people. When I say plain people, then it means that people who are not living in dense forest, who are not living in the hills, people that are very much different from the tribal communities, non-tribal communities people. This is what plain peoples are all about here. This is what we are trying to understand. So they often exercise dominance over the plain people through their capacity to raid. So when I say raid, then it means that attack. So these people have very good or high capacity in terms of raiding. So they had this kind of ability, this kind of capacity. So they were always, in the service of the local people to provide them local protection, I would say local protection or local, support that they could provide to the plain people, right? So from this point, we can really understand that they were really like us, and they were very much in contact with us, not only now, but from a very long time. Now we're going to understand the next point. They were traders of the forest produce. Now, tribal used to trade their forest produce as well. Whatever they would collect from the forest in the terms of certain medicinal plants, certain timber, certain wood, they would, trade all those forest produce. So they were always there in the system. They were not like they were totally out of the system. Now what the next point says here is that the capitalist economy derived to exploit forest resources and minerals and to recruit cheap labor has brought tribal societies in contact with the mainstream society a long time ago. It is not like tribals are coming nowadays only to work in the industrial areas. They used to come in the past time also to work in the industrial processes as a cheap labor. So they were providing, this particular community was providing cheap labor to many of the people a long time ago as well. So these are the points, that you got to understand when we have to argue, or when we have to say that they were not much different from us. They were very much, involved in the process. They were very much involved in the system. I'm sure you've understood everything regarding this. This particular session is going to end within 1 minute now. Okay, I've got the indication. I hope you've understood everything. I'll send this PPT in the group, and I expect all of you to go and see what is there in the PPT and try to understand. And in case you find any kind of doubt, you can text me. Okay, so Until then, take